Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you. I appreciate you being with me here on Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are continuing our examination of the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all of the world as a witness to the nations, then comes the end. So, when the disciples asked Jesus for a sign of his coming, this parousia, and the end of the age, Jesus told them that that gospel had to be preached into all the world. When it was done, then comes the end. And I began yesterday to show to you, and we focused on Romans, how Paul affirmed that the gospel had been preached in all of the earth and into all the world, oikumene. And that he then followed up on that by saying in Romans chapter 13, their salvation, the promised salvation, the salvation of Romans chapter 11, that would come at the day of the Lord, Christ's parousia, was nearer than when they very first believed. And he said the appointed time is what they knew about. They understood the appointed time. And Paul said that the hour had arrived for them to wake out of their sleep. Well, that sleep is a metaphor for death. It's a euphemism, if you please. Sleep in the Old Testament, over and over and over and over and over again, just like the word darkness. Darkness represented death. And so when we find the biblical references to being brought out of darkness into light, folks, that is resurrection language. And so here in Romans, as we saw, Paul affirms the night is far spent, the day has drawn near. Now, I ran out of time before I could finish my analysis of Romans, but you need to see that in Romans chapter 16. Keep in mind, Paul affirms twice in Romans, actually more than that, Romans 1:5, Romans 1:8, Romans chapter 10, Romans 16, 25 and 26, that the gospel had been preached into all the world, into all the earth, to all nations. And then he affirms, Romans 16, 20, and now the God of peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly. Listen to me. Listen very carefully. The term that shortly is taken from in Romans 16, 20 is entakai. And it never, listen to me, catch the power of this, it never, ever, ever indicates rapidity of action as opposed to imminence of action. It may sometimes conflate the concepts, but they are never, ever a focus on the rapidity of action in total disregard of the imminence of the action. And that's easily proven. Nonetheless, here once again is Paul closing out his book in which he affirms repeatedly the completion of the world mission, closing that book out by saying that the time of the destruction of Satan had drawn near, it was at hand, and it was coming shortly. Now watch this. In the book of 1 Corinthians, in the book of 1 Corinthians, which of course must be taken within the same contemporary context as Romans, where Paul affirms the completion of the gospel, preaching of the gospel into all the world, Paul told the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 4 to 8, that they would live until the day of the Lord. That's language of imminence. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 28 to 32, Paul said, brethren, the time has been shortened. What's interesting about that is that Jesus said prior to the fall of Jerusalem, Matthew chapter 24, 21 and following, 26 and following, Jesus said, except those days, the time of the Great Tribulation, except those days be shortened, even none of the elect would even survive. So here's Jesus predicting, except those days be shortened, and then here's Paul writing later in that generation saying, brethren, the days have been shortened. Coincidence? No. So here's Paul saying, once again, Romans, the gospel had been preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. Now he's saying the days have been shortened, and he says the fashion of this world is, present active indicative, passing away. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, the apostle says, brethren, and he recounts several incidents from Israel's Old Covenant history, and he says, those things happened unto them, and they are types of us, upon whom the ends, literally, of the ages has come. Now, a bit of analysis here. He uses the plural. And he says the ends, and it's from the Greek word telos, which means the goal. And as numerous scholars have pointed out, Paul is not simply saying, oh, well, the termination of the age has arrived. No, that's not his point. His point is, as Davis, Hayes, McKnight, others have pointed out, the goal of all previous ages, as numerous scholars say, he is using the plural for magnification, for emphasis, for hyperbole. The goal of everything, is another way of putting this, has come upon us. Now, the term has come upon us is from the Greek word katentao, and it's the idea of you've been on a journey and you've reached your destination. Well, what was the destination? What was the eschatological consummation? In Acts chapter 26, 6 and following, Paul speaks of the resurrection. And he said, concerning that resurrection, concerning that hope, our 12 tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, earnestly striving and serving God day and night, hope to attain. Katentao. That's their destiny. That's their goal. Paul says, here's Israel's hope. It's the hope of the resurrection. And you see, when Israel would receive her resurrection promises, that resurrection life would then flow to the world. Salvation is to the Jew first, then to the Greek. And so what's Paul saying? Paul's saying he was living in the time of the fulfillment of all of the eschatological promises of the previous time. They were arriving at the destination, the eschatological goal. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 50 and 51, that same apostle, writing about the resurrection, tells them, brethren, I tell you a mystery. That's Paul and his, that's that generation. That's his contemporaries. We will not all sleep, which is a euphemism for dying. So Paul tells the first century Corinthians, to whom he's writing, living, breathing human beings, not all of us will die. Will die before what? Before the resurrection. This is precisely what Jesus said, Matthew 16, 27 and 28. The Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels and shall reward every man according to his works. That's the time of the resurrection. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here, that was 2,000 years ago, that shall not taste of death. That's just like Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 15, we will not all sleep. Just like Paul saying in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 15 and verse 17, brethren, those of us who are alive and those who remain until the parousia. You see? Jesus has promised that that generation would not all die before the coming of Christ in his kingdom. At the time of the judgment, which is the time of the resurrection, is reiterated by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, we will not all sleep. It is reiterated in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, those of us who are, present active indicative, the remaining ones, those who remain until the parousia. Oh, which, by the way, effectively refutes the idea that the parousia was at the ascension. Paul was talking to living, breathing human beings, and he said they would live until that event. The parousia was already, the ascension, that is, was already past. So what do we have? We have Paul affirming the completion of the world mission, the book of Romans, as we've already seen. And now here in 1 Corinthians, Paul affirms over and over and over and over again the imminence of the end. Oh, by the way, he closes that book out with, Maranatha, come, O Lord. That was not a timeless, ambiguous, elastic and plastic statement of imminence. It was, after all, an affirmation, a prayer of affirmation that the Lord was coming soon. Okay, we've got more. Don't forget my July 2019 two-book special. Regularly, these two books will cost you almost $41 for the month of July 2019. Total delivered price, delivered to your door, $30. Save you almost $11, folks. Go to my website, and by the way, that's Into All the World Then Comes the End, and it is The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. It is the only full preterist exegesis of 2 Peter chapter 3, but of course it's far wider than that I'm available, or that I'm aware of. So, go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, tab right at the top, banner right at the top. Click on it, place your order. I appreciate it very much. Okay, we've got more. I'll see you on the flip side.